Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order now and get started. Thank you so much for coming out on what is a lovely evening. You could be doing other things, but I know that the presence here, the numbers here, is a very strong reflection of the passion there is at present right around the country for seeing socialism getting embedded into the Labour Party and the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn solidified and made to deliver the promise that it offers. So welcome comrades to this meeting. We have our two very special guests tonight. We have Rebecca Long Bailey, I'm told to call her Becky Long Bailey, who's the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasurer and John McDonnell's deputy in the Shadow Cabinet. And she's going to talk about the new economics. That's we've heard all sorts of suggestions that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't actually have any policies, Well, a lot of work has been done in developing economic policy, and I'm sure you're going to tell us about that. We also have Alice Mann, who used to be an MP in this area. Yeah. A much loved and highly regarded ex-MP, well-known lefty rebel. Well, welcome, Alice.
Hi everybody, so I'm Becky and I'm the relatively new MP for Salford and Eccles, and as you can imagine it's been a bit of a baptism of fire over the last 12 months, from becoming an MP and thinking that I might have to try and kind of fight to push the party towards its socialist values, to the explosion of socialism that we saw last summer with Jeremy's election. And, obviously, I won't speak too much about what's happened in Parliament, but I'm sad to see what happened over the last few months. It's really distressed me, and I think it's affected every Labour Party member, whatever their affiliations are. And I hope that we can sort it out as quickly as possible. But one thing's for sure, I think the ideals that Jeremy has put forward on the table and the enthusiasm he has inspired in people's hearts is not going away. As you probably know, John McDonnell and the team have been going around the country and trying to get academics, leading economists and local people to hold their own debate about economics, and it's been well attended. We've had a few in the north. We had one in Manchester that I went to. It literally sold out within 10 minutes. And they weren't kind of Labour Party members. These were people from right across the community that wanted to come and have a debate about economics. Because one thing was abundantly clear, austerity wasn't working, and I think we'd lacked an industrial and an economic plan across the nation for decades. So I thought tonight, before we go into how we sort it out, I'd take you on a bit of a magical historical mystery tour to let you know why we are where we are now. We're working towards something, and we were moving in quite a good direction, and inequality in the 60s and early 70s was actually at an all-time low, so times were good for a very short while. So what happened? Well, neoliberalism happens, and from 1979 onwards, I've got a bit of a joke that I can't do a speech without having a rant about Margaret Thatcher, and this one's going to be no different. So the year I was born in 1979, obviously we saw the installation of Margaret Thatcher, and everything started to change, and we saw across communities in the north deindustrialisation. We saw the outsourcing of labour to cheaper labour markets overseas. We saw the closure of the pits, the closure of other industries in the north, and we were told that it was all going to be all right, because despite the fact that we were losing our jobs, it would be difficult for a while, but the wealth that was being sucked up to the top would eventually trickle down, and we'd all have a slice of the pie. Well, that didn't happen, and I think we've come to the realisation that this economic theory, or lie, was a complete load of rubbish. So, when we look at neoliberalism and the way it's affected everything across the world, it's quite staggering to see that it's had a little kind of piece in every kind of like major crisis that we've seen over the last few decades. We saw the financial meltdown of 2007 to 2008. There's the offshoring of wealth and power that came out in the Panama Papers recently. It was all a result of neoliberalist economics. The destruction and privatisation of the NHS, the introduction of markets into our public services, the dismantling of education, child poverty levels where over a third of children are living in extreme poverty. We've got living standards at an all-time low, lower than the average life expectancies, and in my constituency, in some parts of Salford, life expectancy is lower than the Gaza Strip, and that's absolutely shocking in this day and age that we would have parts of the UK with lower life expectancies than war zones. What is neoliberalism then? Well, the term itself was coined at a meeting in Paris in 1938, and amongst the delegates that were there were two men who came to define the ideology, a guy called Ludwig von Mises and a guy called Friedrich Hayek, and they saw social democracy and collectivism, such as Britain's welfare state, as totalitarian, and they instead promoted the principle of individualism. And Hayek wrote a book that you might have heard of, that Margaret Thatcher waved around like a Bible in the 1980s, called The Road to Serfdom, and she based most of her economic and social policies upon that book. Now, the individual was key in all of this. It was all about me, as my mum says. And markets were left to be free and completely unfettered. Taxes were to be low, everything had a price, and public services were to be non-existent because they inhibited the market. And the state was essentially only there to keep law and order. And the gap between those at the top and those at the bottom reaches levels, quite frankly, that would rival the Victorian era. And no matter how hard any of us work, even if we've been to Oxford and we've got our first, we will never, ever get the opportunity to aspire to the levels of wealth that are currently held by that 1% at the top. So there's no such thing as an American dream, and there's no such thing as a British dream, and that's what we need to start fighting against now. Now, as John McDonnell has said, we can't turn the clock back to 1997 or even 1945, but we've got to rewrite the rules now about the way our economy operates, and it's not. We don't have the option of tinkering about with what's already there, which is what previous governments have done. We have to radically alter the way our economy works, and we need to ensure that the North in particular receives the investment that it deserves. Because I think, and I'm sure the same is true in Halifax and communities around Yorkshire, but I could feel on the streets of Salford when I was knocking on doors in the referendum that people were really angry. And they wanted to go out and they wanted to vote to try and make a difference. And whether they voted Leave or they voted Remain, they felt that they were playing some small part in trying to rebuild a nation that they wanted to be proud of. And they were directing their anger in some cases against the wrong section of society, because media and certain elements of the campaign were stirring up a hornet's nest of immigration, as if that was the reason that people were suffering financial hardship. And people were angry because they couldn't get their kids into the schools that they wanted to get them into. They couldn't get a GP appointment when they wanted to get it. The gran wasn't getting the social care that she deserved after putting most of her life into national insurance contributions and trying in her own way to make the country great. So you can see why they were really angry, and they were right to be angry. And I think for the last 30 years, no government has really delivered a vision that makes people excited about the future of this country, that builds a vision that makes people proud to be British, and that is what we've got to do. And at the same time, when we provide that vision and that investment, we need to make sure that the prosperity that we generate through that industrial strategy is shared out to all corners of our community. And we want an economy that, if you work hard, you will get on and you will have the opportunity to achieve and aspire. And you shouldn't have to go to university to have a fantastically paid job. You should have a fantastically paid job in industry, because those jobs should be given the respect that they deserve. Our public sector jobs should be given the respect that they deserve. And we need to look at other industries such as the care sector, which should be given the respect it deserves. I think we need to create that sense of community and co-working within government and outside. And we need a fairer, more prosperous economy, and one, quite frankly, that actually works, because we know that austerity doesn't work. And now's the time to rewrite the introduction to a new economic era. And thanks very much for having me, I really appreciate it.